A federal district court issued an order prohibiting the U.S. Department of Labor from closing Job Corps centers across the country. One of those centers is in our area. It's the Mississippi Job Corps Center in Crystal Springs. Congress established Job Corps in 1964 to provide young people with education and vocational training. The federal court granted a motion filed on behalf of 7 Job Corps students and a nationwide class seeking to stop those closures. Now, Job Corps supporters say the move would have put vulnerable young people on the street, and today a federal judge agreed. Closing the centers is illegal. There are 99 Job Corps centers throughout the country.